Imagine feeding a classic 19th century romance novel into an automated storytelling AI. The plot makes sense for a few pages, but suddenly your Victorian heroine is wearing a space helmet. You start noticing unwarranted film grain coating the images. Quiet drawing rooms are randomly replaced by flashing space-age environments. The system is experiencing sci-fi drift. It's hallucinating these details because of its original programming constraints. When the AI encounters ambiguous data, it retreats to its comfort zone. In this case, it aggressively forces the output to look exactly like a 1940s radio studio. The issue runs deep into the code itself. Restrictive phrases like grounded in real science and cinematic 35mm are permanently baked into every layer of the generative prompts. We refer to this as a hard-coded monolith. No matter what raw text you feed into the pipeline, the architecture wrestles the output back into a rigid sci-fi identity. You might think the solution is to simply delete the sci-fi prompts, but if you remove those guardrails, the entire generative workflow crashes. At the center, the production ledger passes instructions to audio, video, and OBS nodes. If a node receives an unrecognized command, it doesn't report an error, silently reverting to sci-fi defaults. Therefore, the production ledger must remain completely locked down. To solve the drift without breaking the system, we have to leave the downstream pipeline alone and build an entirely new upstream architecture from scratch. The solution is an upstream control plane. We take the tangled generation logic and split it into 3 independent swappable modules. The first module is the source bank. This dial strictly defines the origin of the raw data before any storytelling processing occurs. The legacy input for this system was called Science News. It ingested narrow data seeds like reports on astrophysics or aerospace engineering. Now we can load up a completely different origin point, like a media archive. The raw data changes from rocket launches to lost film preservation. These inputs are locked behind strict Pydantic v2 code contracts that guarantees no unstructured text can leak into the prompt generation phase. Explicitly defining the data source at the very beginning blocks the AI from assuming the content is a sci-fi premise. Dial 2 is the story model. This sets the dramatic narrative shape, operating completely independent of where the source data came from. When you load a media archive source, the system assigns a tailored model, like a restoration adventure. Crucially, this model carries strict guardrails that actively ban space opera tropes from the plot. The final dial is the visual style policy. It functions as a strict central checkpoint determining the aesthetic finish of the project. It acts as a filter. If you choose a clean, paper origami look, the policy steps in and aggressively scrubs out terms like cinematic film grain before the prompt reaches the render engine. Because these new modules are built in pure Python, they adhere to a fail loud engineering discipline. If the system encounters an unrecognized style, it stops the entire process and throws an explicit error rather than quietly hiding the mistake. Source, story, and style. By isolating these 3 variables, the monolithic code is replaced with a modular, highly controllable matrix. With the pure code tested, the final step is the transplant phase. The new control plane is carefully wired into the live Comfy UI workflow. This chart shows the final result. On the left, the upstream architecture dynamically adjusts 3 dials. On the right, the downstream ledger remains stable, holding its structural shape. The contract is entirely preserved, but narrative content flowing through it is dynamically altered. You can render a science broadcast, swap to an archival documentary, and seamlessly switch the output to an origami landscape or a hand-drawn anime cityscape. By decoupling the creative intent from the mechanical execution, a rigid, single-purpose tool scales out to become a universal storytelling engine.